Hello, everyone. Welcome to our LHC first video session, which we decided to put together. My name is Victor. I'm overseeing all LHC operations out of our Asia office based in Bangkok, Thailand. Great to have everyone joining this session today. The reason why we decided to put it together is, I think over the last few weeks at least, we've been seeing certainly more positive news all across the globe with regards to the whole pandemic situation, and more news coming through that countries will be reopening soon, and therefore hospitality industry, tourism industry will start the recovery. Now, throughout the last 12 months or even more so, the industry has certainly been impacted a lot. A lot of organizations had to go through major restructuring programs. A lot of teams have been completely reshuffled, made a lot of organizational changes. Some roles have been changed and evolved as well, or even some departments merged together. So we wanted to look into that and see whether how significant those changes are, and whether those changes will also go and stay post the pandemic. To join the discussion, we decided to invite our friend and partner as well, Chris Mumford, who is based in London, UK. Chris is running his own company called Cervus Consulting, specializing also in hospitality sector. Chris has been in the market for over 20 years now, I believe, Chris?
Yeah, great to say.
Had worked in all parts of the world, had lived in Japan as well as in States, Germany, and now UK. Worked on multiple projects in Asia, Europe, Middle East, States. So again, has a vast knowledge and experience. So we thought that would be the perfect person to discuss this. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Victor. Really looking forward to having a conversation today. There's lots to talk about, I think. Certainly, very interesting, tough times for our industry, but it looks like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So looking forward to our chat, and also to hearing from Bangkok and what you're seeing out in Thailand and the rest of the Asia region.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's go straight to it. I think, like I've mentioned, certainly most of all organizations related to hospitality had to go through certain reviews and structural changes, and of course, cost optimization. Now, as you know, with cost optimization, obviously, many companies immediately start looking at staffing and looking at making the personnel smaller, leaner teams, maybe looking at even merging some of the departments, or like I've personally seen here in Asia, many or some of the key managerial roles have been left completely vacant. So the owners or the management companies decided to completely keep those roles unattended for the time being and wait till the business comes back. Now, from your experience, can you probably look at three core and major areas where hospitality industry has had to restructure? I mean, these are three specific departments which you've seen being looked in the most.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, I could speak obviously in general terms. Market to market, there's been differences in just how extensive some of the cuts have been. So, for example, here in Europe, there's been a lot of government support. So while a hotel may not have, had to necessarily cut people, they've had their staff on furlough, which so the government has been funding that essentially. So one hopes that a lot of that employee base will be there when things reopen back up. In other markets, particularly, your part of the world where these schemes don't exist, owners, to your point, of hotels had to take much more drastic action and reduce overhead significantly, which, to your point, is really payroll. And so, I mean, I know you've got an example of a case where you called a hotel and there's a security manager, a security guard there, and there's no one else there right now because there's just no business. If you then move up to the kind of corporate infrastructure of hotel groups, most have gone through one, if not more, phases of restructuring, which is a nice word for saying job cuts. Last summer, most of the groups, and I'm talking of the Hyatts and the Hiltons and the Marriotts and Accors, etc., reduced corporate headcount by 20% or more. And then there's been some additional cuts over the pursuing months as they started to restructure and realign, how they operate. So, for example, if they were running the world across 5 regions before, now it's maybe 3 regions. So you've lost 2 regional presidents, for example, and you take that down into the various disciplines, sales and marketing, operations, et cetera, that all then gets cascaded down, and you've suddenly got, 2 people competing for one job, albeit that job is bigger than it was before. So there's a lot of that going on. I mean, in terms of specific departments, I think the one to highlight is there was a lot of attrition in sales and marketing and in the revenue management disciplines, for the very simple reason that there was nothing to sell. If your hotel's closed, it's why do you need a sales director? And if there's nothing to revenue manage, why do you need a revenue management director? So those areas got hit quite quickly. And then I would say operations, again, because of restructuring and, collapsing regions and structures and geographies, where you may have had, 5 GMs in a market, maybe you've now reduced that to 3, if you had as a kind of regional GM. So I'd say in operations as well, there's been quite a lot of, cutting and getting leaner. And then I think in most other areas, I mean, certainly finance and human resources have been under so much pressure that there haven't been really many cuts in those areas, because, those are the key kind of parts of the business when you're going through this kind of restructuring. Little bit of cutting in development, but not much from what I see. Most brands have fairly uniformly kept their development teams together, with the odd exception here and there. So yeah, that's kind of where I've seen most activity over the last 12 months.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I'd agree with you on certainly on the development side, because I mean we've recently had a separate discussion saying development overall is much more stable, and also it's looking at the long-term, right, at long-term projects. So that field is haven't been impacted perhaps as much when it comes to job security. Here in Asia, I'd say the major difference to what I've seen in Europe is certainly the financial support that was given to the companies from the government during the pandemic. And hence it's certainly resulted in a much higher structural changes, and obviously as laying off personnel. I mean, furlough doesn't really exist as such here in Asia, with an exception of few countries such as Singapore, where the government does support. But for the most part of it, if the company has to let people go, it's basically on a permanent basis after finding the agreement of settlement. So with that, a lot of hotels still remain to be closed, and I think also the difference is we haven't had any regional traveling, unlike Europe here. If Europe still had, Germans would travel to Spain, UK would travel as well to Turkey for the summer period. We haven't had that at all. So all of the countries really rely on self-sustainability, and therefore domestic markets. And for the most part of it, those markets are not developed. I mean, they've never been a focus of the countries. Everyone was really looking at the long haul or any kind of regional international traveling, but the domestic markets are purely weak, and not enough volume to sustain the infrastructure related to hospitality. So
I think that's what's different this time around. Maybe if you take the global financial crisis as the last comparable crisis of any scale that affected things globally, this time I think once businesses recognized that this was not going to be over in 3 months. Okay, I mean, if you think back to this time last year, everyone thought, this pandemic's running through, it will kind of go through 3 months or so, and then we'll start kind of getting back. But once that realization kicked in that actually this is going to take a long time, I mean, to your point, without the government support in place, owners had no option. But how can you retain, particularly in the full service, upper end of the market, how can you maintain an excom of, which is probably 50% expat, and that cost base when you're looking at no revenue, to your point, even coming in from the region, there's just no money coming in the door. So how can you maintain that cost structure?
Yeah. So yeah, it's true. So if I look at the departments or specific functions, I think yes, sales by all means, because also a lot of senior management commercial sales roles have been filled previously by expatriates, because like I said, naturally the business was coming through international markets, so you would want to have the expertise and the language capacity sitting in those roles. So a lot of changes have happened there. A lot of people have left, and I'm not looking only at Thailand, actually at the whole region. So there was a lot of changes there, and instead some of the sales functions have remained, but they purely fill those positions with local natives, because of naturally trying to find any source of business coming from a local market. So you know, if you are selling to a Thai in a Thai hotel, there is not that much of urgency or requirement to have a German nation or French nation or whatever the background. So and with that, there are obviously a certain cost benefits as well. You don't have probably a family package or all other expatriate benefits. So
yeah, there's definitely been a pivot, of you've got to look at your domestic market, and it's going to be interesting to see how that focus maintains or is sustained as we come, as travel picks up in international markets. We would just go back to, you take a 5-star internationally branded property in somewhere like Tokyo, let's take the Aman Tokyo. That was, I would guess, probably about 80% international customer base pre-pandemic, right? And now I'm sure they've had to pivot and really drive much more domestic local business in Japan, and also to their resort properties, Kyoto and Namainimu, and really, yeah, to your point, then you need much more of a locally focused, domestic market focused sales force to go and drum up that business.
And the other change I see when it comes to sales overall as a roles, I think in a longer term, how I see, there won't be that many positions as a proactive salespeople functions. I mean, we've seen over the past months how companies have found a way to generate future leads, revenue, as well as they understood that they can still keep the relationship with the agents overseas through the technology, through the Zoom calls, Skype calls, whatsoever. So I think a lot of owners and operators would probably look at, okay, why do I need another eight salespeople running across the globe, meeting face to face, which is for sure is a critical and important factor. It's all about face to face meetings. It is about the relationship, but still, I think they would look at and say, well, instead of 8, I maybe have 1, 2, or 3, and they still can do that. And non-essential traveling will be substituted with the meetings like we are having now. So you still can discuss whatever the contract agreements. You still can talk about the commercials, strategy, tactical offers, etc., etc. For that you don't need to physically fly to another continent to sit down and talk through for a 2-hour or day meeting even.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I know of one of the big, well-known luxury hotel groups who reduced, their sales offices around the world. I think they had about 15, and they basically have cut that down to 7, and no expectation that they will ever need to go back up to 15 sales offices around the world. And I think, you referenced something that was maybe already starting to happen in terms of how business gets contracted. If you look at the trade shows, the ITBs, the World Travel Markets, etc., those were kind of starting to lose their relevance. Traditionally, that was the time where people showed up and, Berlin for ITB or World Travel Market here in London, and then they'd be signing their annual contracts, with their customers. But that's kind of no longer the case. That doesn't really, it's losing its impact. But I think it was a crisis like this, as it always does, it gave companies a chance to reset and to go on a diet, frankly, to get lean and mean. So this whole stripping out of layers and restructuring and becoming leaner and fitter, this has been a good opportunity to do that as a business. Obviously there's a human, impact on that, which is unfortunate, but as a business, it's a great opportunity to have streamlined. And the interesting thing, I think, looking forward, is that once business levels do start to pick up and business starts coming back in the door, these businesses are going to find their profitability to be pretty interesting, because they're going to be running on leaner, more streamlined structures, and it's going to be interesting to watch how much of what we had before gets put back in.
Yep.
Right. And historically over time this stuff always creeps back in, and before you know it, after 5 years from now, a lot of these companies historically would have looked very similar to they did before in terms of headcounts and so on. I'm not sure we're going to see that to the same degree this time. I think people are going to be more measured about adding in, rebuilding their organizations to have the same level of resources. I think technology is going to play a part in allowing them to leverage, greater efficiencies through tech, but maybe not, through headcount. And they're going to want to maintain that profitability, I think, for a while to kind of rebounce from where we are.
Yep, absolutely. And you've mentioned technology, and actually leads me to a second department, which I think, at least here in Asia, I've seen certainly picking up. Its value has become more significant, in my opinion, over the last months. I mean, I've always seen it as a significant department, and I've seen that change over the years. But I believe the last 12 months has certainly fast forwarded it, is the revenue department, commercial department, depending on how each company calls it. Because I remember when I just started my journey in hospitality and working on a hotel side, revenue department, I've always felt it was a department which just collects the data and puts it together in the spreadsheets and gives to the salespeople and also other departments to make whatever the conclusions and make their own judgment. Whereas I see now revenue department, yield management becoming really a core function of operations, where the person leading the revenue team or commercial team has certainly a similar say as the rest of the management of what should be the strategies and how the hotel or the company shall move forward when it comes to commercial element. I mean, I know hotels here which had almost no sales team, because they've done what I've just said before. They completely trimmed down the team. They said there is no guests. If anything, we'll rely on online market. So they kept the revenue person, and then revenue person ultimately told me that it was she in that particular case. She told me she was doing actually and the sales function and discussing with all these online channels on all of the deals and contracts, as well as looking at the marketing side, because she said it's all I have to cover myself right now. But then immediately her responsibility naturally, went up in the whole organization. And I see post-pandemic, we will see more value given to the revenue department as well.
Yeah, unquestionably. And I think, we've seen that move. If you look at the profile of general manager, how that has evolved over the last 10, 20 years, whereas when I started out in this game, most general managers had come up through food and beverage or maybe front office, and they were very, focused on what is happening on the floor operationally. And then it evolved over time to having to become much more commercially astute in terms of, how am I filling my bedrooms upstairs? How am I yielding, to your point? And then, together with, absolutely right. I mean, revenue directors have, the industry took a while to really understand revenue management and to try to learn from airlines and other sectors, but, they started getting their act together. And those roles clearly have a seat at the table now. And I think with on the technology topic, my colleague Sean Worker, who just released his book, The Adapters, The way he describes it is we made 10 years of advances in hospitality technology in 10 months. I mean, it really accelerated the adoption of tech and going forward. And I know there are various people out there, either redefining existing businesses or starting to look at launching new businesses which are highly tech reliant. And it's almost going to be running hotels like fly by wire. It's going to be, enabling the people on property to be really focused on the guest engagement. And a lot of the other stuff is going to be tech enabled and AI and so forth. And whether that's the sales process to get the booking in the first place through to operational efficiencies. So I think there's going to be some really exciting things coming out in the sector over the coming years. Around how properties are actually run and how the business is sold.
Absolutely. Now that's I think we will see certainly more changes coming with regards to technology. And if I'm correct, is Accor, right, who just recently introduced or launched a plan to change all of the keys to the digital digital check-in through a mobile app, including your key will be on a mobile app, right, so that all of the doors can be unlocked. Now,
yeah, I mean, that's a great example of something which was already in process, but this has suddenly kicked it into, right, it's not coming, it's actually now here. I mean, everyone's now, to your point, everything's going to be done on the phone. You're going to open your room. It's all going to be app-based.
But then what kind of makes me think further is, once this is all in place, or is in place, or getting in place right now, what happens with those roles of a front desk? Because naturally you would need less resources on the front desk stuff. It's all much more automated. And will those departments merge? Because again, I've seen some companies now with the current limited resources looking at how front office can also do the housekeeping and all of the back office job. I wonder how this will then lead to further merge or change, evolution of certain departments within the organization. Because this key card example, but more and more technology, a lot of technological innovations are coming in place.
Yeah, I think, Victor, this is a really interesting point. I think we're going to have to reframe how we view the business, and it's maybe we don't think in terms of these traditional departments anymore. I think the people on property are going to have to be much more multi-skilled, and there's going to be a big emphasis on multi-skilled training. So your person that you're hiring may not be designated as a front desk agent or assistant front office manager or what have you. They are just job title X, and when someone walks in the property, they help that guest with whatever they may need. It may be that they don't want to do, this person isn't comfortable with doing contactless check-in and they need escorting to their room and then delivering, making them a coffee while they're waiting for their room to become available. Whatever it is, people are going to have less strictly defined roles, and it's going to be much more about how do we delight our guest, how do we create an experience for our customer. And that's the focus of the person versus, okay, well, my job is I can only do these things because that's what it says in my job description. I think those days are gone. So it's going to be much more about, multi-skilling. Yes, to your point, maybe the property needs fewer employees ultimately, but I think the employees it does have are going to be much more centered around how do we create a great guest experience. And that could be whether you're staying at an Ibis or a Raffles. It doesn't really matter. And I think we also got to think about how hotels are going to evolve. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of, what is a hotel's purpose and how does it connect with society and the community and neighborhood around it? So a hotel, in a great city like Bangkok, which may have internationally branded, might have been reliant very heavily on international custom before now. And it still will be going forward, but it's also maybe going to be trying to, how do I service my area, my neighborhood? What services can I be offering them? Is it, from simple things like dry cleaning and food delivery to, you come and pick up your parcel, or you can come and, the ballroom we're letting out on Wednesday afternoons to the local nursery so they can do kiddies hour or something, whatever it is. But there's going to be different ways that I think and I hope that the hotels engage, and therefore that will create, different roles or different areas of focus and responsibility for the people on property.
Totally. I think hospitality, I mean, you probably also come across those statements where hospitality was always seen as a traditional industry where there are a lot of set rules, traditions, and certain processes that have been followed through, generation to generation, which is amazing and it's great. I mean, it's part of why I've also chosen the hospitality. But I believe at moments that what also made harder for the industry to embrace new technology, new trends, new drivers, or basically the industry which was not that easy to adapt. And I think the current situation of the current pandemic we are in has certainly pushed the unwillingly, but for good, to change for the industry to start looking at different things. I mean, examples you've mentioned are also here. I see it here. Hotels now looking at not just selling a room. I mean, F&B has really stepped up in the game. I mean, there is so many different innovations, not just in terms of course, the food itself, but the overall experience, but also the offers, the different, campaigns they are launching. I think it's so much more dynamic because the hotels have always been seen, the F&B was seen as an added value, as a next experience if you have a room. But now they're looking at how can they attract just me, an outsider, to go in and dine in the place without staying. That's one. Second is, rooms as well, how to maximize space, right? Even when the business comes back, you will have, of course, your high season when you would fill in the rooms, you would run at a high occupancy, it's always fine. But the low season will always be there. And I believe what a lot of companies has learned now is to look at the rooms, not just selling as a room, but maybe converted it to the office space, converted it to kids' room. As you said, they offer, I've seen some hotels offering space for kids to come in and play during the day, as they provide a nanny service. So families know, okay, I know mama and papa can go and work and the baby is looked after by a qualified babysitter in a good environment and get all of the needed care and support. That's just some of the examples, but there is many more. I really believe that we will see a change of how hotels are being run, and probably even the departments you've mentioned might not exist as traditionally we saw them, and it will be a 360 function of a person to cater to whatever service requirements are needed by a guest, whether it's a room service or check-in or help to explain, how to get to the pool, whatever those questions are.
Yeah, absolutely. So my question for you, Victor, is obviously you still need someone to run it, right? To run the place, you still need a level of management, maybe not exactly the same as it was before, but you ultimately need managers, or leaders, I should say. So, I know that one of the things you've noticed during this phase, this pandemic, has been the increase in owners, particularly looking to hire locals into these roles, into these leadership roles.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you is, do you expect that to continue? And how easy has it been? I know you've recruited a number of these. How easy is it to find the local talent for these kind of positions?
For the senior management roles, I believe it will naturally continue. I think it's just part of any country evolution. You just come to a point that you start understanding that the local talent can fulfill whatever the requirements are of the business. It's just, like I said, I think we spoke about it before the pandemic. I think there was several reasons why owners were at the beginning were always looking for a foreigner talent to come in and lead the property. It's not good, not bad, but there were reasons behind it. I mean, it was something what has started 20 plus years ago when the industry started booming here. So the first, it's easy, right? Instead of investing and spending time into growing your own talent, you as a business, you want to get the show running now. So you bring in the existing talent from somewhere else who has experience, who has knowledge, who has proven track record. So that's one. Two is, like I said, it's time. I mean, once you have the business running, you want to start seeing the results now. To grow and nurture somebody to fill in that role requires commitment. It also requires finances. And also the other point, which I believe is also an equally important factor, is how the industry is positioned and promoted for future students and graduates. I mean, it is a responsibility also to a degree of a government to make sure that there is enough emphasis or enough right color given to those industries which they think are essential for the country's economy, to be seen by students as, okay, that's a career path I want to pursue, hence I'm going to go and start studying it. If this is, so there is a lot of pieces and different parts of the puzzle, which I think were not always playing together, and hence we've seen obviously certainly not that many talents or not that many opportunities for local talents before. Now with the pandemic, when everyone starts looking instead of inside themselves, right? That's a natural reaction. They start looking at, okay, what we can do here in order to survive and in order to go through this challenging time. They start obviously looking at the cost optimization, and it's again the natural field that, okay, instead of bringing somebody abroad with a family, whatever the expenses for relocation, I'll just look for somebody who is already here, thus local citizen. So I believe it will continue, because it's just something what maybe the situation open the eyes for people, that we can look here rather than always from bringing people externally. How challenging is it? It's challenging because of all of the factors I said before. We've been working on a number of roles for general manager level, and there were specific requirements to fill in those positions with local candidates. And you can see once you start looking at just a next door competition of similar profile properties, not just in the same city, but even just the equal profile in other cities or even in the neighborhood countries, you see that the current roles are filled predominantly not by local talents. So then you start going a layer down, and that's where you start trying to pick up those potential future leaders who can step in now with these existing opportunities. And that's what we've been conveying as well to our clients. We're saying, look, if you want to have somebody long-term start leading your property as a general manager or even further in a corporate office environment, you need to be open to take up a certain risk and commitment. A risk by probably looking at somebody who is still young, who is still hungry, who is still maybe yet to develop into that senior leadership role. And by saying commitment, you need to commit with making sure you nurture that person, you give the opportunities for that person, and whether it's financially, time, or whatever other resources, you basically support that candidate to grow into the next step. So it's a transition, let's put it that way. It will take time. It won't be from one day to another, but I believe we see a change happening.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely, as you say, as the market, continues to mature, you've got more and more people who've been in it, building up their experience, the talent pool will grow. I think the point you raise around, at the entry level into the sector and hospitality as a choice of career, that's, in my experience over the last 20 years, has been an issue that the industry is constantly grappling with, and it's one that is pretty universal. I seem to see that. I mean, we certainly have that issue in the UK, and now that's exacerbated by the fact that we've had Brexit and we don't have access to a lot of EU labour, where which we were quite reliant on for those kind of entry level jobs. You'd have young people from Spain or Poland or wherever coming in for 2-3 years to improve their English, and they'd be working in the restaurants and hotels, which is great. But your average British 22-year-old apparently doesn't want to do that. And I know in your market in Asia, again, I guess if you speak to, you get an honest conversation from most Asian parents, they don't necessarily think their child is going to go into the hotel industry. They want them to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or something. But so that's a constant challenge, and the industry needs to continue trying to beat the drum and give examples and illustrations of how great an industry this is, and the opportunities it can give people. I know there's some of the European hotel schools are starting to open up campuses in Asia, which is a good sign, hopefully, in terms of education levels. So as you say, it'll take some time, but it seems to be, it's a natural evolution, to your point, and it will continue to pick up pace.
Yeah, I think the last part is, like I said, it's equally important. And you mentioned, right, as Les Roches has actually just opened its representation, its local campus here they cooperated with Minor Hotel Group as well. So I think it's a good step forward for sure. And interestingly, last week I was participating in one of the recruitment sessions by Glion and Les Roches for future students. So I was invited to share my experience. And I must say, I was positively surprised to see people asking questions and genuinely interested in the hospitality industry as a career path. And I think that's what we would like to see more. I mean, as we all know, it's certainly not an easy industry. It's certainly, an industry that requires a lot of energy to be put in. I mean, it's not a clock in, clock out business by all means. However, it's also an industry which gives in my opinion, a lot of opportunities, both professionally but also personally. I mean, if you look at traveling, I think what other industry can allow you to travel as much as as we do within the hospitality and tourism sector. So it was very, very good session last week. Like I said, just to see that people, despite the pandemic and despite everything what we've gone through, still asking questions and still saying that's my career path. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah. Now, question back then, just about the leadership. We've spoken. We said that of course this will require all departments and people to start looking certainly more outside of their own box and start being able to multitask, multifunctional, bring in different skill set. How do you see the leaders and how do you think their roles will evolve from what we've seen before? Let's say general manager, which is a very traditional function for many of the hotels before. It has a certain, requirement, certain background. Do you think that will change as well? Will we be looking at different profiles who step in as general managers? Would we see more people coming from different industries as well? Maybe not, from a hospitality background as such, and rather just moving from running other type of businesses that are commercially focused.
If you look at leadership generally in our space, whether it's general manager or your vice president or a CEO, I think in the current environment, if I look at where is the principal focus of, what does leadership mean? Some of these things have become, I don't think they've changed, but they've become highlighted and they're being put under the microscope by the pandemic. And I'm thinking of things like communication, right? So communication has always been a key core tenet of good leadership. But suddenly in the last 12 months, it became like even more important because you had to engage and communicate with your employees in new ways because you weren't necessarily sitting together. You weren't in the same building. You might not have been in the same city. You were doing it over the internet or what have you. And you were having to, bring support and bring hope and inspiration and be able to communicate those things to people during what was a very challenging, tough time. So, I think the importance of communication cannot be underestimated. And I think actually a lot of leaders will be increasingly assessed on their communication ability. Tied in with that is then the empathy So I think we've seen, it sounds a bit trite, but a more human leadership style come in. And I think actually this kind of communication style of Zoom, the fact that you're talking to me in my home right now, and it starts to reveal something about me. I'm less of a robot kind of mechanized leader. You can see pictures, and you can start to build up an image about me. But I think that has enabled leaders to become more accessible to their teams, and therefore be able to be more empathetic with their colleagues too. They're more understanding of what their employees are having to deal with, if it's childcare issues or health issues or mental problems, whatever it may be. So I think we've got a much higher degree of focus on employee well-being and employee engagement. And then you're throwing in societal issues like diversity and inclusivity, which again was always there on the agenda, but it's really been ratcheted up in the last 12 months. And so I think, there's that element of leadership is going to take up an increasing amount of space for leaders around how do we look after our people? What do we as an organization stand for? What's our purpose? And that's relevant if you're a general manager of a hotel. It's relevant if you're, Chris Nassetta running Hilton as CEO. That's the same. Then I think on top of that, it's it's not, leaders they don't need to be an expert in a particular area. They don't need to be the greatest revenue manager in the world. They don't need to be the greatest restaurant manager in the world. They need to have a high level of understanding of these multiple areas of the business, but then it's about bringing the right people together and providing direction and inspiration to better lead those team of experts together. And I think, good leaders going forward, we're going to increasingly look for an ability to deal with uncertainty. I mean, if this crisis has taught us anything, it's, leaders need to be able to react fast. They need to be able to think flexibly. They need to be able to, I hate this word pivot because everyone uses it, but they need to be able to think about the business. Okay, what are we going to do now? How are we going to react? And so I think flexible thinking and the ability to deal and be comfortable with uncertainty, with not knowing. Okay, I don't know what my business looks like 6 months from now in terms of, I haven't got 70% occupancy on the books in July. I'm just going to, so it's starting to get used to those things. So I think it's less about leadership going forward, or in the current environment, it's less about technical skill set. It's more about your mental agility, and then how you care about your community, and that's both employees and guests and neighborhood, and how you interact and engage with all those things to keep moving the ball down the road.
Yeah, well, will be interesting to see how we see that transition continuing after things start getting stabilized and after the business starts coming back.
Sorry, Victor, to your point about will we see people from other businesses coming in? Maybe, why not? It's not exactly rocket science. So again, if you've got the right leadership capabilities and the right mental agility, you can pick it up. I do think we will see more and more recognition of the skill set that hospitality leaders can bring into other spaces. So particularly kind of peripheral areas of operational real estate. So whether that is, senior living, healthcare, hospitals, student housing, these residential living, these hybrid other forms of real estate that have a high level of service offering, and those are all expanding fast. I think people with good, strong hospitality skills are going to be sought out for these other sectors, which is great, because it's always been a bit frustrating that hospitality has hired people from outside, but you don't see much going in the other direction. And I think we're going to start to be recognized for the skills that we have.
Yeah, agree. And I've seen examples of some of the management level roles of people from a management level roles within the hotels moving into, throughout the past months, they moved to retail, big shopping centers, taking care of some service functions, setting up standards, operational standards, even the commercial bits, or marketing bits, they moved from a hotel to a retail side. And the other area, which I've actually for quite a long time, I always considered being run exactly as a hotel, is the hospitals here. If you look at all these major privately owned hospitals in Bangkok, if you walk in, you literally are in a hotel with a medical service attached to it.
Yeah, exactly.
The moment you have the reception, you have all of the F&B outlets and so on and so forth. So it's I think there's certainly a lot of skills which can be transferred from hotel background or hospitality background to other industries where, especially where service is the forefront of output of output. So well, let's see. I mean, like I said, I'm very interested to see how, hopefully sooner rather than later, we see the borders reopening and traveling starts coming back, and we see the normal, as we say, environment, or the environment we also got used to before. Whether those changes we saw now will continue and will be fully embraced, or we will see some of the areas getting back to usual routine, so to speak, as what we've seen and knew before. I mean, I hope that actually industry continues to stay agile, to stay really that flexible and dynamic as we've seen it now. It's not good, as you said, a lot of people has been unfortunately suffering, which is certainly not something we want to see. But at the same time, I've seen industry just kind of fast forwarding a lot of processes from where it was just 12 months ago. So, well, let's see. I think an interesting year ahead.
Yeah, and the good feeling I have around, I mean, the fundamentals for our business are so strong, and they've only been emphasized during this time. As soon as borders have opened up, people have traveled like crazy. So that, there's still, that's not going away. And then the other reassuring factor is there is so much investment interest in the sector. There's an awful lot of money sitting out there wanting to invest in hotels and in hospitality, because again, they see the fundamentals are there and the bounce back will be strong, and they want to be in for that ride. So yeah, I'm very bullish and positive around the future. It's maybe not coming as quickly as we all want. We're all a bit impatient, but it's going to be, there's no question this industry is in a really strong place.
Perfect. Well, once you get your vaccine done, I think you will be welcome in Thailand by October.
I'm coming for my mango sticky rice as soon as I can.
The mango sticky rice is there, just the vaccine, and I think in October you shall be able to come in.
Look forward to it.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It was great chatting with you, and enjoy, for you still the morning, so enjoy the day ahead.
Thanks, Victor.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.